Death Valley, one of the hottest, most unforgiving places on Earth. In the summer of 1991, a 9-year-old girl named Millie Monroe vanished here without a sound, no witnesses, no evidence, no trace. For a decade, the desert kept its secret, until a chilling discovery shattered everything. Her bones were found hidden in a cave, just feet from where she was last seen. But the truth? It wasn't the desert that took her. It was someone far closer. Someone who smiled in family photos. Someone who tucked her into bed. What happened to Millie wasn't an accident. It was a betrayal. It was the summer of 1991 when the Monroe family set out for what was meant to be a peaceful weekend escape, just a few days under the sun in Death Valley, a place Lavra Monroe had visited as a child and longed to share with her own family. She and her husband Michael packed up their station wagon in New York with snacks, sunscreen, and the bubbling excitement of their 9-year-old daughter, Millie. Millie wasn't just a child full of life. She was the kind of girl who left an impression. Kind, gentle, and bright beyond her years. Her teachers adored her. Her classmates gravitated toward her. She had just won first place at her school's science fair and written a poem that brought her English teacher to tears. People said she had a gift, a light inside her that made her unforgettable. Joining them on the trip was Laura's cousin, Deborah Wells, along with her husband Rick and their 10-year-old daughter, Chloe. On the surface, it was a simple family. Gathering cousins reconnecting, kids playing, adults sharing stories, and catching up on lost time. But beneath that picture-perfect exterior was an uncomfortable tension, quiet and invisible. But growing Deborah had always lived in Laura's shadow. In school, Laura was the one with the perfect grades, the charm, the grace. As adults, Lavra had built a beautiful life-respected husband, bright daughter, a home filled with love. Deborah tried to keep up, but there was always that gap. Chloe, sweet and sensitive, was always compared to Millie. And in Deborah's eyes, she was always second-best. It hurt more than she ever let on. What made it worse was that Millie, in her innocence, never noticed the resentment. She treated Chloe like a sister, shared her toys, whispered secrets, even helped her with homework during their last visit. But for Deborah, every compliment Millie received was a dagger, a reminder that her own daughter was never the one being praised. The two families reached Death Valley by late morning. The air shimmered with dry heat, and the horizon seemed to stretch forever. They explored the trails, took pictures on rocky ledges, and shared sandwiches under a rare patch of shade. Millie was in her element, curious, adventurous, fascinated by the desert. She sketched a cactus, pointed out rock formations, and talked about fossils with a kind of wonder that only children truly know. But Lavra couldn't ignore the way Deborah kept glancing at her daughter, the way her voice stiffened every time Millie spoke. Michael noticed it too. Still, they said nothing. Maybe it was just the heat. Maybe it was old family rivalry that never really faded. They didn't know it yet, but this was more than just a family weekend. Something far darker had come with them into the desert, and it would leave them with a wound that would never fully heal. Because in the middle of it all was Millie Monroe, bright, talented, and completely unaware that her light had started to cast shadows in places it never should have. The second day in Death Valley unfolded like something out of a dream. The sun was merciless, but the Monroe and Wells families were determined to make the most of it. They had already toured Zabriskie Point, snapped photos against sand-colored ridges, and shared cold drinks in the shadow of ancient rock formations. Laughter echoed across the arid landscape. For a while, it truly felt like everything was perfect. Millie Monroe was glowing. She had braided Chloe's hair that morning, then asked her dad to take a photo of the two of them near a stack of weathered stones. Chloe smiled, but only halfway. She didn't speak much that day. Millie didn't notice. She was too busy soaking up the adventure. She pointed out coyote tracks, picked up a feather she thought was from a hawk, and drew quick sketches. In her notebook every time they stopped to rest. She was a child completely alive in the moment. They stopped near what looked like an inn, abandoned structure half buried in sand and surrounded by dry, golden grass. It wasn't marked on their map, but it looked safe enough. A low, cave-like rock, formation with a warped wooden beam leaning across its mouth. A place once used for shelter, now forgotten by time. The kids wandered a little as the adults laid out lunch nearby, unpacking juice boxes and sandwiches with tired hands and sunburned skin. Deborah barely touched her food. She sat stiffly, eyes flicking between Chloe and Millie. Lavra tried to make small talk, but Deborah didn't respond. She just kept staring. And when Millie ran over with a flower she'd found blooming in the shade, Deborah gave the faintest smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. After lunch, the children were allowed to play for a while. Chloe wanted to stay close, but Millie convinced her to explore just beyond the rock outcrop. The girls disappeared behind the tall grass, skipping toward the barrels and the mouth of the cave. Michael and Rick sat back, chatting about directions, unaware that anything was about to go wrong. And then ... silence. Not the kind that creeps in gradually, but the sudden, jarring kind that freezes time. Laura called out once, lightly, expecting Millie's familiar reply. Nothing. She stood. Called again, louder. Nothing. Panic bloomed like wildfire. Within seconds, both families were shouting, running, scanning the landscape. Chloe appeared first, shaken, wide-eyed, pointing vaguely toward the rocks. I don't know where she went. She whispered. The cave was empty. The trail was cold. There were no footprints beyond a few smudges in the sand. No broken twigs, no scream. It was as if Millie had been lifted from the earth and erased in an instant. Rangers were called. Helicopters searched overhead. Dogs sniffed the air. Volunteers scoured the area for miles. But the desert offered nothing. Not a shoe, not a shred of fabric, not even the notebook she carried everywhere. As the sun set, turning the sky into molten red, Lavra fell to her knees beside the rocks where Millie had last stood. Her scream was the only sound for miles. Millie Monroe was gone, and Death Valley kept her secret. After Millie disappeared, time became a strange, twisted thing. The days that followed blurred into one long, aching moment. Lavra Monroe barely slept. Her voice grew hoarse from shouting Millie's name into the desert wind. Michael tried to be strong. He stood beside search crews, combing the area with trembling hands, but he was unraveling too. The desert gave them nothing. No echo of footsteps, no cry for help, no trace of the daughter they'd raised with love and laughter for 9 beautiful years. Authorities launched a massive search. Helicopters painted circles in the sky. Dogs sniffed every bush and crevice. Flyers were posted. Reporters swarmed. Still nothing. As the days passed, hope began to rot into something darker. Suspicion. Questions. Why had Chloe been so quiet? Why did she say Millie just disappeared? Why did Deborah seem so distant, so rehearsed in her grief? She hadn't cried once, not in front of the cameras, not even in front of Lavra. Rick tried to offer condolences, but something about his calm unsettled everyone. Eventually, the search ended. The case was marked unsolved, and the families returned home. At least most of them did. Lara refused to accept it. She couldn't. Her house in New York became a monument to her missing child. Millie's room stayed untouched, bed made, art supplies neatly laid out, drawings still pinned to the wall. Lavra kept the porch light on every night. She bought a new answering machine and changed the message weekly, just in case Millie called. Every year on her birthday, Lavra lit a candle and whispered into the silence, "I'm still looking." Michael, grieving in a quieter way, tried to return to work, but the weight of not knowing broke something inside him. He grew more distant, and eventually the marriage buckled under the strain. By the end of 1994, they were living apart. Chloe, now a teenager, grew more withdrawn. She hardly spoke to anyone. Teachers noticed the change, once a bright student. She stopped engaging in class. Deborah became even colder, brushing off any questions with clipped words. "We've moved on," she'd say. "You should too." But Laura never did. Not when the media lost interest. Not when the detectives stopped calling. Every month, she mailed out missing person flyers to police departments, parks, bus stops, anywhere Millie's face might be seen. She hired private investigators, read books on survival, even considered psychics in her lowest moments. She wasn't searching for a body. She was searching for a heartbeat. Then, in 2001, something shifted. 10 years had passed. Most people had stopped saying Millie's name. But one morning, Lavra received a call from a park official in California. A maintenance team had found something strange, a hidden area near the old shelter, overgrown and half collapsed. Inside, there were bones. The voice on the line was careful, clinical. They needed dental records. They needed confirmation. Lavra dropped the phone before it even hit the cradle. She already knew. In the hollow space where hope used to live, she felt it like thunder. Millie had never left Death Valley. She had been waiting silently, alone just feet from where they last saw her. The call came on a Tuesday morning in early spring, just after Laura had returned from dropping off a new stack of missing person flyers. The voice on the line belonged to a park ranger from Death Valley, calm, methodical, but with an undertone. That made Laura's stomach turn. A crew clearing overgrown brush near an old rock formation had stumbled upon something. Human remains, small, fragile, tucked inside the shadows of a narrow, collapsed cave. Just feet from where Millie had vanished 10 years before. Lavra dropped into the nearest chair as the world around her fell into silence. They didn't need to say the name. She already knew. For days, she waited in a fog. When the confirmation came through dental records, through bone measurements, it wasn't a surprise. It was a scream locked inside her chest, finally let loose. Millie Monroe had been found, not in a different state, not with a stranger, not on the run. She had been right there, hidden by rocks and silence and time, for 10 long years. But it wasn't just the remains that shook everyone. Inside that small, dark cave, half covered by a decaying tarp and a mess of tangled brush, the investigators found something else. Something chilling. Hanging from a cracked wooden beam, faded by years of sun and dust, was a child's silver bracelet, delicate, still intact, and engraved with 4 haunting words. Love, Aunt Deborah. It didn't make sense. Why would Millie have that? Why would it be there? The bracelet opened a door no one was prepared to walk through. Forensic teams examined the site meticulously. Millie's bones showed clear evidence of trauma, a sharp fracture at the back of the skull. The kind of injury that wasn't caused by a fall. It was deliberate. It was final. The conclusion was grim, but undeniable. Millie had not gotten lost, had been killed, and suddenly, the story everyone believed for a decade collapsed. Detectives reopened the case. Interviews were scheduled. Witnesses revisited. Lavra sat across from investigators, hands clenched, her voice hollow as she repeated what she'd always known deep down, that someone on that trip had taken her daughter away. They questioned Deborah first. She kept her answers cold, controlled, emotionless. Said she didn't know how Millie had ended up with that bracelet. Claimed it must have been stolen or planted. But her hands trembled. Her voice cracked when they mentioned the skull fracture. She asked for a lawyer. Rick was next. Quiet, uncomfortable, but adamant he'd seen nothing. Then came Chloe, now 20. She sat alone, pale and visibly shaken. For 10 years, she had been silent. For 10 years, she had carried the truth. And now, that truth was clawing its way to the surface. The bracelet hadn't been lost. The cave wasn't random. Millie hadn't simply vanished. Someone had taken her life and hidden her like a secret. And Chloe Wells was about to break the silence that had buried Millie for a decade. It was a gray, quiet morning when Chloe Wells walked into the sheriff's office. 10 years had passed since her cousin Millie disappeared in Death Valley, and Chloe had carried that silence like a second skin. She was 20 now, but the weight she bore aged her far beyond her years. The detectives had asked to speak with her again, but this time she came in alone, no mother at her side, no attorney whispering in her ear. She sat across from the lead investigator, eyes low, fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. They mentioned the bracelet. She flinched. When they described the injury to Millie's skull, she broke. "I saw it," she whispered. The room fell completely still. Chloe's voice trembled, but the words came anyway, faster, sharper, as if, once the dam cracked, everything inside her rushed out. And what she told them unraveled every lie, every half-truth, every twisted silence that had haunted Millie Monroe's case for a decade. That day in Death Valley, after lunch, Millie had found the bracelet half buried near the old shelter. It must have fallen from Deborah's bag earlier. Millie had picked it up, dusted it off, and brought it over to Deborah with a smile, saying, "You dropped this." Chloe said she remembered how excited Millie was to give it back. It had her name on it, and she thought it was a gift. But something in Deborah snapped out. It wasn't just the bracelet. It was everything. The long drive from New York filled with Millie's laughter, the compliments from the park rangers about how smart she was, the way Rick kept saying, "Millie's such a bright kid." All of it burned at Deborah's pride. She had spent years feeling like she and her daughter were always second best, always just behind Laura and Millie. And in that moment, it was too much. Deborah didn't scream. She didn't argue. She simply took the bracelet from Millie's hand, looked her in the eye, and shoved her. The ground near the cave was uneven, littered with rock fragments. Millie stumbled backward, lost her footing, and struck her head on a low stone ledge. Chloe said it made a dull, terrifying sound like something heavy dropped on wet clay. Millie crumpled instantly, not even a gasp. Chloe ran to her. There was blood. Too much. Millie wasn't moving. Deborah stood frozen for a moment, then knelt beside her. She touched Millie's neck, whispered something Chloe couldn't hear, and then turned to her daughter with a strange, cold stillness in her eyes. "She fell," Deborah said. "You understand? She fell. You didn't see anything else." Chloe was 9, terrified, confused, and desperate to believe her mother wouldn't hurt anyone, especially not Millie. But she knew what she saw. Deborah dragged Millie's body into the cave and told Chloe to stay outside. She found the old tarp, covered her niece, and placed branches over the cave mouth to keep animals away. Before they left, she looped the bracelet onto the wooden beam. Maybe guilt, maybe a twisted memorial, maybe both. Deborah warned Chloe never to speak of it again. Told her that if she did, the police would take her away too. That she'd go to jail. That no one would believe. A little girl. So Chloe stayed quiet. For 10 years, she carried that secret in her chest like a growing storm. She saw therapists, took sleeping pills, struggled in school. But the guilt didn't fade, it rotted. And when Millie's body was found, when the bracelet made the news, it became unbearable. "I wanted to tell someone 100 times, Chloe said through tears, but I didn't know how." And she made me think it was my fault, too. When the detectives asked if Rick had known, Chloe shook her head. I don't think so. He never asked questions. He never wanted to know. The confession shattered everything. Deborah Wells was arrested that evening in her quiet suburban home. She didn't fight. She didn't cry. She said nothing at all. Her husband watched in stunned silence as officers placed her in handcuffs and led her away. Chloe refused to go home. She stayed with a cousin from her father's side while investigators prepared charges. Lavra Monroe was sitting alone. When she got the call, they didn't have to explain it, just hearing the words. Chloe talked, made Lavra drop the phone and weep into her hands. For years, she had feared the worst. Stranger abduction, trafficking, some monster lurking in the desert. But the truth was worse in its own quiet way. Millie had been taken by someone she loved. Family. Laura attended the trial, every single day, sitting silently in the front row, clutching Millie's bracelet like a lifeline. Chloe testified with her voice shaking, but she never looked away. She took responsibility for her silence, and Lavra, somehow, found space in her heart to forgive her. Not because it made anything better, but because she could see the damage. Guilt had already done to that girl. Deborah was sentenced to 25 years to life for second-degree murder. The judge called her actions cold and cowardly. But no sentence could fix what had been lost. Millie Monroe was buried beneath a cherry blossom tree in a small cemetery just outside of New York. Hundreds came to her memorial, including teachers who still remembered her smile, classmates who never forgot her kindness, and strangers who'd followed her case for years. And Lavra finally let herself grieve. She still keeps Millie's room the same, still plays her favorite music on quiet mornings, still finds feathers in odd places and tells herself they mean something. But now, when she stands at her daughter's grave, she doesn't whisper promises to keep searching. She just says, "You're home now." Because after 10 long years, the silence is over. The secret is no longer buried. And Millie Monroe's voice, gentle, brilliant, and brave, has finally been heard.